I drove through the entire night to make it to our family dinner. 8 hours on dark, empty roads, my hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting exhaustion with every mile. My son had invited me weeks ago, insisting I be there. I imagined their faces lighting up when I arrived, the warm embraces, the laughter around the table. I pictured my grandchildren running to hug me, telling me how much they'd missed me. But when I finally reached his door, exhausted and hopeful, my son opened it with an expression I'll never forget. Cold, distant, annoyed. "Mom, the dinner was yesterday," he said flatly. "And honestly, nobody even noticed you weren't there." Those words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, trembling with fatigue and disbelief, staring at the son I'd raised alone, the son I'd sacrificed everything for. What I didn't know was that this cruel moment would become the catalyst for the truth to finally surface. A truth so devastating it would shatter his perfect life and force him to confront what he'd really thrown away. Sometimes the people we love the most become strangers, and sometimes those strangers learn too late what they've lost. If you want to know what happened next, keep watching this story. I never imagined that driving 8 hours through the night would lead to the moment that would change everything between my son and me forever. But that's exactly what happened. And I need to tell you this story because maybe some of you have felt invisible in your own family too. It started 3 weeks before that terrible morning at his door. My son called me, which was already unusual because he rarely reached out anymore. "Mom, we're having a family dinner on the 20th, he said. "Sandra's parents will be there, the kids, everyone. You should come." His voice had that forced cheerfulness that I'd learned to recognize over the years, the tone that said he was checking a box, fulfilling an obligation. But I was so desperate for connection with him that I ignored the warning signs. "Of course I'll be there," I told him, my heart swelling with hope. I wouldn't miss it for the world. "Great," he said quickly. "It's at 6 o'clock. Don't be late." Then he hung up, and I sat there holding the phone, trying to convince myself that his coldness was just because he was busy. He had always been busy, especially after he married Sandra and started climbing the corporate ladder in that big city 5 hours away. My son, who used to curl up beside me on the couch for movie nights, who used to tell me everything, had become this distant stranger who called me 3 times a year if I was lucky. Give it a thumbs up if you think I did the right thing by trying to maintain our relationship despite everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got to this point. I raised my son alone after his father walked out on us when he was just 4 years old. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to make sure he had everything he needed. I went without so he could have new school clothes. I skipped meals so he could go on field trips with his classmates. I put every spare dollar into his college fund because I wanted him to have opportunities I never had. And he did well. Better than I ever dreamed. He graduated with honors, got a prestigious job, married a woman from a wealthy family, bought a beautiful house in the suburbs. Somewhere along the way, though, I became an embarrassment to him. It started small, little comments that stung but that I tried to ignore. When I showed up at his college graduation in my best dress, the one I'd worn to every important occasion for 10 years, he barely looked at me. At his wedding, Sandra's mother made sure I was seated in the back, far from the family tables. I overheard Sandra whispering to her sister, "Yes, that's his mother. Can you believe she wore that outfit?" I tried to suggest something else, but you know how stubborn older people can be. I pretended I didn't hear. I smiled through the whole ceremony, even though my heart was breaking. Because that's what mothers do, right? We swallow our pain and show up anyway, hoping that someday our children will remember who was always there for them. The weeks leading up to that dinner, I planned everything carefully. I took extra shifts at the department store where I worked part-time to buy nice gifts for my grandchildren. I found a sale on a lovely cashmere sweater for Sandra, trying so hard to win her approval even though she'd never shown me an ounce of warmth. I made my famous apple pie, the one my son used to love, wrapping it carefully for the long drive. I even went to the salon and had my hair done, spending money I really didn't have because I wanted to look presentable, wanted my son to be proud of me for once. Leave me in the comments. Have you been through something similar with your own children? The night before the dinner, I couldn't sleep. I was too excited, too anxious. I kept imagining how it would feel to sit around their table, to be part of their lives again. Maybe this dinner would be a turning point. Maybe my son was finally ready to let me back in. I set my alarm for 3 in the morning, planning to leave at 4 so I'd have plenty of time to arrive before 6 o'clock. The drive was long, and I wanted to account for traffic, rest stops, any unexpected delays. But when my alarm went off, I couldn't get out of bed. I don't know what happened. I'd been so exhausted from working double shifts all month that my body just wouldn't cooperate. When I finally jolted awake, it was already 5 in the morning. Panic seized me. The dinner was at 6, and I had an 8-hour drive ahead of me. I did some quick, desperate math. If I left right now, if I drove straight through without stopping, if there was no traffic, I might make it by 1 or 2 in the afternoon the next day. It wasn't ideal, but I convinced myself it would be okay. I'd arrive late, yes, but I'd still be there. I could explain what happened. My son would understand. He had to understand. So I threw on my clothes, grabbed the carefully wrapped presents and the pie, and ran to my car. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I felt my face burning with shame at the thought of being late, but I pushed the feeling down and focused on the road ahead. The drive was brutal. I've never felt so alone as I did during those dark hours, watching the highway stretch endlessly before me. My eyes burned with fatigue. My back ached from sitting in the same position. But I kept going because I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing my son, of proving Sandra right that I was unreliable and unsophisticated. Every hour that passed, I glanced at the clock and calculated when I might arrive, each time feeling that sinking sensation in my stomach as I realized I was getting later and later. Around 2 in the morning, I stopped at a gas station for coffee and to use the restroom. A kind clerk, a woman about my age, noticed how exhausted I looked. "Honey, you need to rest," she said gently. "You look dead on your feet. There's a motel just up the road." But I shook my head. "I can't stop. I have to get to my son's house. Family dinner." She gave me this sad, knowing look, like she could see something I couldn't, and just patted my hand. "Safe travels then. But be careful. Nothing's worth risking your life." Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. I got back in the car and kept driving as dawn broke over the horizon. Beautiful sunrise colors painted the sky, but I barely noticed. My whole body ached. A lump tightened in my throat when I thought about how my son used to depend on me for everything, how he used to think I was the strongest, most capable person in the world. When had I become such a burden to him? When had my love become something he tolerated rather than treasured? By the time I reached his neighborhood, it was almost noon. I'd been driving for 8 hours straight, running on nothing but gas station coffee and sheer determination. My heart pounded so hard it hurt as I pulled up to his beautiful house with its perfect lawn and expensive cars in the driveway. I checked my appearance in the rearview mirror, trying to smooth down my hair and hide the exhaustion in my eyes. Then I gathered the gifts and the pie, which had survived the journey remarkably well, and walked up to his front door on trembling legs. I rang the doorbell, practicing my apologetic smile. I heard footsteps inside, and then the door opened. My son stood there, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. Not surprise. Not concern about why his mother was arriving at noon instead of 6 o'clock the previous evening. Just irritation, cold and unmistakable. "Mom," he said flatly, "what are you doing here?" The question confused me. "I'm here for the dinner," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "I know I'm late. I'm so sorry. I overslept and then I drove all night to get here." "Mom," he interrupted, his tone sharp with impatience. "The dinner was yesterday. Last night. At 6 o'clock. Like I told you." He said it like he was explaining something obvious to a child, like I was stupid for not understanding. I felt the floor opening beneath my feet. "Yesterday?" I repeated, my mind racing. "No, you said the 20th. Today is the 20th. He sighed. That heavy, exasperated sigh I'd heard so many times in recent years. "Yesterday was the 20th. Today is the 21st. And honestly, Mom, nobody even noticed you weren't there. Sandra's parents asked where you were, just to be polite, and I told them you probably got confused about the date. We had a lovely evening without any drama. Would you do the same in my place, or would you have turned around right there?" Those words hit me like a physical blow. Nobody even noticed you weren't there. Each word was a knife, cutting away at whatever hope I'd been clinging to. I stood there on his doorstep, trembling with fatigue and disbelief, holding presents for grandchildren who hadn't missed me and a pie that nobody wanted. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I held them back because I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down. "You're saying I drove through the entire night," I said slowly, my voice shaking, "for a dinner that happened yesterday, and not one person in this family cared that I wasn't there." My son shifted uncomfortably, finally having the decency to look slightly guilty. But then Sandra appeared behind him, her face twisted with annoyance. "Is that your mother?" she asked, not even greeting me. "I told you she'd show up eventually and make a scene. Can you please handle this? I'm trying to organize the playroom." Something cold fury settled over me in that moment. This woman who had never worked a day in her life, who'd been handed everything on a silver platter, was treating me like I was an inconvenient door-to-door salesperson. And my son whom I'd sacrificed everything for, was just standing there letting it happen. "I'm not making a scene," I said, my voice steady now despite the rage coursing through my veins. "I'm just trying to understand how I got the date wrong when you specifically told me the 20th. My son's face flushed. "I don't know, Mom. Maybe you wrote it down wrong. Maybe you're getting forgetful in your old age. It happens." The casual cruelty of that statement, the suggestion that I was becoming senile and unreliable, was more than I could bear. "I'm 58 years old," I said quietly. "Not ancient, not senile." And I wrote down exactly what you told me. I pulled out my phone and showed him my calendar, where I'd carefully noted family dinner 6 p.m. March 20th. His eyes flickered with something, recognition maybe, but he quickly looked away. "Well, it was yesterday," he insisted, "and you missed it, so there's really no point in you being here now. We're busy today. The kids have activities and Sandra and I have plans." If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment what you would do in this situation. I looked past him into the house I'd never been invited to stay in overnight, the house where I was always a temporary visitor who had to leave before bedtime. I could see my grandchildren's toys scattered around, photos on the walls of Sandra's family at various celebrations. Not a single picture of me. It was like I didn't exist in their world except as an occasional inconvenience. "Can I at least see the children?" I asked, hating how desperate I sounded. "I brought them presents. I haven't seen them in for months." Sandra made a disgusted sound. "They're watching their educational programs. We don't interrupt their screen time schedule. Maybe you should call before showing up unannounced next time." She said it like I was some stranger off the street, not the grandmother who used to babysit those children every weekend before they moved away. My son at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Mom, maybe you should head home. Get some rest. You look exhausted. We'll plan something another time, okay?" He was already closing the door, dismissing me like I meant nothing. And that's when something inside me snapped, not in an explosive way, but more like a final thread giving way. I'd spent 34 years bending over backward for this man, sacrificing my own happiness, my own dreams, my own life, to make sure he had everything he needed. I'd worked my fingers to the bone, gone without food and sleep and basic comforts, also he could have a better life than mine. And this was how he repaid me, by treating me like a burden, like an embarrassing relative to be hidden away and ignored. "No," I said simply. The word surprised both of us. My son's hand froze on the door. "No," I repeated, stronger this time. "We're not planning something another time, because there won't be another time. I'm done." "Done with what?" he asked, confusion crossing his face. "Done with begging for scraps of affection from my own son. Done with being treated like I'm worthless. Done with accepting disrespect from you and your wife and pretending everything is fine." My voice was steady, cold even, and I could see the shock registering on his face. I'd never spoken to him like this before. I'd always been the accommodating mother, the one who swallowed her hurt and kept showing up. "Comment below what you would have done differently in my situation." Sandra pushed forward, her face red with anger. "How dare you speak to him that way? After everything he's done for you, giving you money whenever you ask money I asked for." I interrupted, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "I asked you for $200 one time, 3 years ago, when my car broke down and I couldn't get to work. You both acted like I'd ask for your firstborn child. I paid you back within 2 months, with interest you insisted on even though I'm your mother. Every other penny you've ever given me has been a guilt offering, thrown at me on birthdays and Christmas like I'm a charity case. My son's face went pale. That's not fair, Mom. You're being dramatic. Dramatic? The word tasted like poison in my mouth. I drove 8 hours through the night to get here because you told me this dinner was important. Because you made me believe, for just a moment, that I actually mattered to this family. And now you're telling me I got the date wrong, that nobody even missed me, that I'm probably getting senile. My hands trembled with contained rage. I am not being dramatic. I am being honest for the first time in years. This is exactly why we don't invite her to things, Sandra said to my son as if I wasn't standing right there. She always makes everything about her. Your mother is exhausting. I looked at Sandra, really looked at her, and saw nothing but contempt in her eyes. This woman who'd married into money and thought it made her better than everyone else. This woman who'd never struggled a day in her life, who'd never had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying groceries, who'd never had to explain to her child why they couldn't afford the field trip everyone else was going on. You have no idea what exhausting means, I told her quietly. You've never been exhausted in your life. Everything has been handed to you. You've never fought for anything. Never sacrificed anything. You don't know the first thing about being a mother because you have nannies and housekeepers doing all the actual work. So don't you dare tell me I'm exhausting. Leave me in the comments. Do you think I was right to finally stand up for myself? Sandra's mouth dropped open, stunned that I'd finally pushed back. My son stepped between us, his face a mixture of anger and discomfort. Okay, that's enough. Mom, you need to leave now. You're upset and saying things you don't mean. I mean every single word I said, my voice ringing with certainty, and I'm not leaving until I say what needs to be said. Do you remember when you were 8 years old and you got pneumonia? Do you remember how I stayed up for 3 days straight, holding you, keeping vigil because we couldn't afford the hospital and I was terrified of losing you? Do you remember the Christmas when I told you Santa couldn't afford the expensive toy you wanted, and you cried, and I worked overtime for 2 months to buy it for your birthday instead? His face tightened. That was a long time ago. It was your life. I shot back. Your whole childhood, your whole education, your whole start in this world, that was built on my back. I'm not saying you owe me worship or eternal gratitude. I'm saying you owe me basic human respect. The same respect you'd show to a stranger on the street. And right now, you're not even giving me that. You're being manipulative, Sandra hissed, using guilt to control him. I've read about mothers like you. I couldn't help but laugh at that harsh, bitter sound. You've read about mothers like me? In what? Your psychology magazines while getting your nails done. You have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not trying to control anyone. I'm simply done being treated as less than human by people I loved with everything I had. My son ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was stressed. What do you want from me, Mom? What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me the truth, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Did you deliberately give me the wrong date for this dinner? Did you want me to show up a day late so you'd have an excuse to turn me away? The silence that followed was deafening. He couldn't look at me. He stared at his expensive shoes, at the marble floor of his entryway, anywhere but at my face. And in that silence, I had my answer. Do you think I overreacted, or did I have every right to be angry? Oh my God, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a truck. You did. You deliberately told me the wrong date. A cold fury I'd never felt before washed over me. Why? Why would you do that? Sandra's parents didn't want you there, he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. They think you don't fit in with our lifestyle. Sandra convinced me it would be easier if you just didn't show up, and then we could blame it on you getting confused. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry, but you have to understand, her parents are helping us with a lot of things financially, and I can't afford to upset them. I felt my face burning with shame and rage. You sacrificed your own mother to impress your in-laws. You humiliated me, made me drive through the night, let me believe I was going senile, all because I'm not fancy enough for Sandra's parents. My voice rose with each word. What kind of man have you become? The kind who has to think about his own family first, he said defensively. My wife, my kids, they're my priority now. I can't keep putting your feelings ahead of what's best for them. What's best for them? I repeated incredulously. What's best for them is to learn that you throw away people who love you when they become inconvenient. That you lie and manipulate and disrespect the person who gave you life. That money and status are more important than integrity and loyalty. You're being unfair, he insisted. I still love you, Mom. I still care about you. But my life is complicated, and you don't understand the pressures I'm under. No, I said softly. You don't love me. You can't love someone you're ashamed of. You can't care about someone you're willing to hurt this deeply just to avoid an awkward conversation with your in-laws. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care anymore. Let them see how much they'd hurt me. Let them carry that image forever. Subscribe to the channel if you believe in standing up for yourself when family treats you wrong. My son reached out like he might touch my arm, but I stepped back. Don't, I said sharply. Don't touch me with hands that have pushed me away so many times. Don't pretend you care now that I've finally called you out on your cruelty. I do care, he said, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I don't know how to balance everything. Sandra and her parents, they have certain expectations. Then meet their expectations. I told him, my voice hollow now. Go ahead and be the man they want you to be. But don't expect me to keep showing up to be humiliated. Don't expect me to keep pretending everything is fine when you treat me like garbage. I'm done. Do you understand? I'm done with all of this. I turned to leave, but Sandra's voice stopped me. Good riddance. Maybe now he can finally focus on his real family without you always playing the victim and guilt-tripping him. I turned back slowly, and something in my expression must have been frightening because she actually took a step backward. Real family? I said quietly. Let me tell you about real family. Real family doesn't abandon you when you're no longer useful. Real family doesn't lie to humiliate you. Real family shows up, even when it's inconvenient. Even when it's hard, even when there's nothing to gain. I was real family to my son for 34 years. What you have here isn't family. It's a social arrangement based on money and status and keeping up appearances. You're just bitter because you're poor and alone. Sandra spat back. You're jealous of what we've built. I'm not bitter, I said, and I meant it. I'm heartbroken. There's a difference. I'm not jealous of your money or your big house or your country club memberships. I'm devastated that my son, who I raised to be kind and compassionate and loyal, has turned into someone who would betray his own mother to impress strangers. That's not something to be jealous of. That's something to mourn. Give it a thumbs up if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. I looked at my son one last time. When you were 5 years old, you asked me if I would love you forever, no matter what. Do you remember what I said? He didn't answer, but I could see the memory in his eyes. I told you that a mother's love is forever and unconditional, that nothing you could ever do would make me stop loving you. And that was true, for a very long time. But love without respect isn't really love anymore. It's just pain dressed up as loyalty. Mom, please, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Don't do this. Don't cut us off. The kids need their grandmother. The kids don't even know I exist, I said bluntly. You've made sure of that. They have Sandra's parents, who take them on expensive vacations and buy them designer clothes and fit perfectly into your curated life. They don't need a grandmother who embarrasses you with her department store dresses and her old car and her working-class background. That's not true, he protested weakly, but we both knew it was. I bent down and set the presents and the pie on his doorstep. Give these to the children. Tell them their grandmother thought of them, even if they didn't think of her. Then I straightened up, my back screaming with pain from the long drive, and met his eyes. I hope Sandra's parents' money is worth what you've traded for it. I hope their approval keeps you warm at night. I hope their status makes you feel fulfilled and happy, because that's all you have now. You've chosen them over me, and that's a choice you'll have to live with. You're being melodramatic, Sandra said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. He didn't choose anyone over anyone. You're just making this into something bigger than it is. Am I? I asked. Because from where I'm standing, my son deliberately lied to me to keep me away from a family gathering because his wife and her parents are ashamed of me. That seems pretty big. That seems like the kind of betrayal you don't come back from. Comment if you know someone who's been treated like this by their own children. My son's face was pale now, and I could see that reality was starting to sink in. What are you saying, Mom? That you're never going to speak to me again? That you're cutting me out of your life? I'm saying that I'm not going to keep volunteering for this abuse, I told him firmly. I'm not going to keep showing up to be rejected and disrespected. If you want a relationship with me, if you genuinely want me in your life, then you're going to have to prove it. You're going to have to stand up to Sandra and her parents. You're going to have to choose to include me and respect me, not because you feel obligated, but because you actually want me there. That's not fair, he said. You're putting me in an impossible position. No, you put yourself in an impossible position when you decided your in-laws' opinions mattered more than your own mother's dignity. I'm just refusing to make it comfortable for you anymore. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter somehow despite the pain. I've spent your entire life making things comfortable for you, sacrificing my own needs and wants so you could have everything. And I don't regret that. Those were choices I made freely because I loved you. But I won't sacrifice my self-respect anymore. That's where I draw the line. The street was quiet except for the sound of a neighbor's lawn sprinkler and birds singing in the trees. It was such a beautiful day, warm and sunny, the kind of day that should have been filled with family and laughter and love. Instead, I was standing on my son's doorstep, ending the most important relationship of my life because he'd made it clear I had no value to him anymore. I need you to understand something, I said, my voice steadier now. This isn't about the dinner. This isn't even about you giving me the wrong date, though that was cruel and unnecessary. This is about years of accumulating disrespect and dismissal. This is about watching you become someone I don't recognize, someone who would hurt the person who loved him most just to avoid social awkwardness. This is about me finally admitting that the son I raised is gone, and I don't know this man standing in front of me. Would you have been able to walk away, or would you have kept trying? I haven't changed that much, my son said quietly. I'm still me. No, I disagreed. The boy I raised would never have done this. The boy I raised had integrity and compassion. He would have stood up for someone being treated unfairly, even if it cost him something. He would have valued loyalty over social climbing. You've changed, and not for the better. Sandra and her parents and this lifestyle have changed you into someone I don't even like very much. Sandra made an angry sound. You can't talk to him like that. He's successful and respected and miserable. I interrupted, looking at my son's face and seeing the truth there. Look at him, Sandra. Really look at him. Does he look happy to you? Or does he look like someone who's trapped in a life that requires him to become someone he never wanted to be? For just a moment, I saw something flicker in my son's eyes, a recognition of truth that he quickly buried. But Sandra saw it too, and her face hardened. Get out, she said coldly. Get off our property before I call the police and report you for trespassing and harassment. I almost laughed at that. Call them, I said. Tell them a mother drove 8 hours to see her family and is being threatened with arrest for standing on the doorstep. I'm sure that will sound completely reasonable to them. But I was tired. So tired I could barely stand. The adrenaline that had been keeping me upright was fading, and all I wanted was to go home, to my small apartment with my secondhand furniture and my worn-out couch, the place where I didn't have to pretend to be anything other than what I was. I'm leaving, I said. Not because you're threatening me, but because there's nothing left for me here. But before I go, I want you both to know something. Someday, maybe soon, maybe years from now, you're going to regret this. You're going to need something that money can't buy, support that Sandra's parents can't provide, love that isn't conditional on your bank account or your social status. And when that day comes, you're going to remember this moment. You're going to remember the mother who loved you enough to drive through the night, who worked herself to exhaustion to give you a better life, who would have done anything for you. And you're going to realize what you threw away. Leave me in the comments. Was I right to walk away? Or should I have kept fighting for the relationship? My son's face crumpled slightly, and for a second I thought he might actually apologize, might actually stand up to Sandra and make this right. But then Sandra put her hand on his shoulder, a possessive gesture that made her ownership clear, and he straightened up. Goodbye, Mom, he said formally, like I was a business associate he was dismissing. Goodbye, I echoed, and turned away. I walked back to my car on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. My hands shook as I unlocked the door and climbed into the driver's seat. I sat there for a moment, staring at the house, half hoping my son would come running out, would tell me he'd made a terrible mistake, would beg me to stay. But the door stayed closed. The curtains didn't even twitch. It was like I'd never been there at all. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, watching his house disappear in my rearview mirror. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't bother wiping them away. I cried for the little boy I'd raised, the one who used to think I hung the moon. I cried for all the sacrifices that now seemed pointless. I cried for the relationship I'd cherished that had turned out to be so fragile, so conditional, so easily discarded. The drive home was a blur. I stopped at a rest area a few hours in because I was crying so hard I couldn't see the road. I sat in my car in the parking lot, surrounded by families traveling together, couples holding hands, people who all seemed to have what I'd lost. A truck driver, an older man with kind eyes, knocked on my window and asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was fine, just tired. He gave me a sympathetic look that said he didn't believe me but respected my privacy. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. I'd been awake for more than 40 hours, driven 16 hours total, and destroyed the most important relationship of my life. I stumbled into my apartment, didn't even bother changing clothes, and collapsed on my bed. Sleep came quickly, but it wasn't restful. I dreamed of my son as a little boy, reaching for me, calling for me, and then transforming into the cold stranger he'd become. If you're still watching, subscribe and hit the bell icon to see what happened next. I woke up the next afternoon with a splitting headache and a feeling of emptiness I'd never experienced before. For the first time in 34 years, I didn't have my son to think about, to plan for, to worry about. I didn't have to wonder when he might call or visit. I didn't have to make excuses for his neglect or try to convince myself that he still loved me deep down. I was free, but it felt like the loneliest freedom in the world. The first few days were the hardest. I kept picking up my phone to call him, then remembering that I'd walked away, that I'd meant what I said about not volunteering for abuse anymore. I threw myself into work, taking every shift they offered me at the department store. My coworkers noticed something was wrong but were kind enough not to ask too many questions. One woman, Maria, who'd become a friend over the years, finally cornered me during our lunch break. "Something happened with your son," she said, not making it a question. I'd talked about him so much over the years, always making excuses for why he was too busy to visit, why he rarely called. Maria had always nodded sympathetically, but I could see in her eyes that she'd known the truth long before I was willing to admit it. So I told her everything: the wrong date, the drive through the night, the cruel dismissal, the confession that it had all been deliberate. I told her about Sandra's contempt and my son's cowardice and the way I'd finally stood up for myself. Maria listened to all of it, and when I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Good for you," she said firmly. "I've been watching you break your heart over that boy for 5 years. Ever since I started working here, I've watched you give and give and give, and get nothing but crumbs in return. It's about time you put yourself first." "But he's my son," I said, my voice breaking. "How do I just stop caring about my son?" "You don't," she said gently. "You never stop loving your children, no matter how much they hurt you. But you can stop letting them destroy you. You can love him from a distance and protect yourself at the same time. That's not giving up on him. That's giving yourself the respect he should have been giving you all along." Her words helped, but they didn't take away the pain. Nothing could take away that pain except time, and maybe not even then. Comment below, do you think children owe their parents anything, or is parenting purely unconditional? Tenter novamente continuor weeks passed, and I heard nothing from my son. Part of me had hoped he might call, might apologize, might show some sign that our confrontation had made him think about his behavior. But there was only silence. I tried to adjust to this new reality, this life where I didn't have a son anymore, at least not in any meaningful way. I picked up extra hours at work, started volunteering at a local community center, did anything to fill the emptiness that had taken up residence in my chest. Then one evening, as I was preparing dinner in my small kitchen, my phone rang. My heart leaped when I saw it was my son, and I hated myself for the hope that surged through me. Maybe he'd come to his senses. Maybe he was calling to apologize, to make things right. I let it ring 3 times while I steadied my breathing, then answered. Hello? I kept my voice neutral, not wanting to sound too eager or too cold. Mom! His voice was tight, strained. I need to talk to you about something important. Not an apology, I noted. Not even a how are you. Just straight into what he needed. I'm listening, I said carefully. It's about Dad, he said, and my blood went cold. His father, my ex-husband, the man who'd abandoned us when our son was barely old enough to remember him. He died 2 weeks ago. Heart attack. His lawyer contacted me because apparently I'm mentioned in his will. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, processing this information. I'm sorry, I said automatically, though I felt nothing for the man who'd walked out on us. Are you okay? I'm fine, he said dismissively. I barely knew him, but that's not why I'm calling. The lawyer said that Dad had been trying to reach out to me for years, sending letters and emails that I never received. Did you know about this, Mom? Did you intercept his attempts to contact me? The accusation in his voice was clear, and I felt anger rising in my chest. Yes, I said bluntly. I did. When you were younger, he would send letters maybe once every 2 years, always full of excuses about why he left and promises that he wanted to be part of your life. But he never followed through on any of those promises. He never sent child support, never showed up for birthdays or Christmas, never did anything except send guilt-ridden letters that would have confused and hurt you. So yes, I kept them from you. I was protecting you. That wasn't your decision to make. His voice rose with anger. You had no right to keep my father from me. He was trying to have a relationship with me, and you sabotaged it because you were bitter about the divorce. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, after I'd raised him alone and sacrificed everything, he was attacking me for protecting him from a man who'd abandoned him. Bitter about the divorce? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. Is that what you think this was about? Your father left us with nothing. I was 24 years old with a 4-year-old child. No education, no career, no support system. He didn't just leave me. He left you. He walked away from his own son and never looked back except to ease his own guilt with meaningless letters every few years. Give it a thumbs up if you think parents have the right to protect their children from people who abandon them. The lawyer showed me the letters, my son continued, ignoring my words. He wanted to see me. He wanted to be part of my life. And you kept that from me. You made me think he didn't care, that he'd completely forgotten about me. He didn't care. I shot back. Letters aren't love. Words on paper aren't the same as showing up. Where was he when you had pneumonia? Where was he when you needed school supplies and new clothes? Where was he for every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone in your life? He was nowhere, because he chose not to be there. I didn't keep tenter novamente o continue corral him from you. He kept himself from you by being a coward who couldn't handle the responsibility of being a father. That's your version of events, my son said coldly. But maybe if you hadn't been so controlling, so determined to make him the villain, we could have had a relationship. Maybe I could have had a father growing up instead of just you suffocating me with your neediness and your martyrdom. The words hit me like a slap across the face. My hands trembled with contained rage as I gripped the phone. Suffocating you? Neediness? I worked myself to the bone to give you everything. I went without so you could have. And now you're rewriting history to make me the villain because a dead man's lawyer showed you some letters. He left me money, Mom. A lot of money. His lawyer said he'd been saving for years, wanting to make up for lost time. He wanted to give me opportunities, and he would have if you hadn't poisoned me against him. There was something in my son's voice now, a kind of triumph that made my stomach turn. How much? I asked quietly. What? How much money did he leave you? I could barely breathe through my humiliation, knowing where this was going. There was a pause. $200,000. And a letter explaining that he'd wanted to be part of my life but that you made it impossible, that you turned me against him, that he hoped I'd forgive him for not fighting harder. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. $200,000, and suddenly he's father of the year? Suddenly I'm the monster who kept you apart? Let me ask you something. Where did that money come from? How did a man who couldn't afford child support accumulate $200,000? He had a successful business. He rebuilt his life after the divorce. He rebuilt his life, I repeated slowly, while his son wore second-hand clothes and his ex-wife worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. He had money for himself, for his comfortable life, for his guilty conscience fund, but not for the child he abandoned. And you think that makes him noble? You think that erases 30 years of absence? Subscribe to the channel if you've ever been blamed for protecting your children from people who hurt them. It's more than you ever gave me, my son said, and I could hear Sandra's influence in those words, her poison finally bearing full fruit. More than I gave you? My voice was barely a whisper now, shock and pain rendering me almost speechless. I gave you everything. My youth, my health, my dreams, every single opportunity I never had. I gave you life itself and every moment after. But you're right. I never gave you $200,000. Because I didn't have it. Because I was too busy keeping you fed and clothed and educated. You're making this about you again, he said with exasperation. This is about Dad and what you did to our relationship. The lawyer suggested I might have grounds to sue you for emotional damages for parental alienation. The floor opened beneath my feet. Sue me? You're going to sue me for raising you alone after your father abandoned us? I'm considering it. Sandra thinks it's a good idea. Her father knows some excellent lawyers. You cost me a relationship with my father, Mom. You cost me years of knowing him. And now he's dead and I can never get that back. There should be consequences for that. I felt my face burning with shame and fury. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be my son, threatening to sue me for parenting him the best way I knew how. If you do this, I said, my voice shaking, if you take me to court over this, we are finished. Not just distant, not just estranged. Finished completely. You will never hear from me again. More threats and manipulation, he said dismissively. That's always been your way, hasn't it? Emotional blackmail to get what you want. Well, it won't work anymore. I'm done being controlled by your guilt trips. I have never tried to control you, I said, tears streaming down my face now. I have only ever loved you and tried to protect you. But you've twisted that into something ugly because your wife and her family have convinced you that I'm the problem in your life. Fine, believe what you want. Do what you want. But don't ever call me again unless you're ready to apologize and mean it. I hung up before he could respond, my whole body shaking with rage and grief. I sat in my kitchen for hours, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. My son, the child I'd given everything for, was threatening to sue me. He'd taken his absent father's side, believed the pretty lies and letters over the hard truth of what had actually been there. Leave me in the comments. Have you ever been blamed for doing what you thought was right as a parent? Days turned into weeks and the threatened lawsuit never materialized. I wondered if it had been an empty threat, meant to hurt me, or if Sandra's father had explained how ridiculous it would look in court. Either way, I heard nothing. The silence was somehow worse than the confrontation had been. At least anger was something, a connection however toxic. This silence was erasure. I tried to move on. I really did. I focused on work, on my new volunteer activities at the community center where I helped serve meals to the homeless twice a week. I found comfort in helping people who actually wanted and appreciated the help, who said thank you and meant it. Maria became a closer friend, often inviting me to dinner with her own family. Her adult children treated me with more kindness and respect than my own son had shown me in years. But at night, alone in my apartment, the pain was overwhelming. I would look at photos of my son as a child, remembering the sweet boy who used to make me Mother's Day cards covered in glitter and crayon drawings. Where had that boy gone? When had he been replaced by this cruel stranger who valued money over loyalty, who believed lies over lived experience? 2 months after that terrible phone call, I was at the community center helping prepare dinner when Maria pulled me aside. Her face was serious, concerned. You need to sit down, she said gently, guiding me to a chair in the corner. I have something to tell you, and you're not going to like it. My heart started racing. What? What happened? My daughter works at the hospital, you know that. She called me this morning because she saw your son's name on a patient list. Maria took my hand, squeezing it. He was admitted 3 days ago. Some kind of accident, she wasn't sure of the details, but it's serious. She thought you should know, even though she probably shouldn't have told me. The room spun around me. 3 days ago? And no one called me? But even as I said it, I knew why. Sandra wouldn't have called. She probably celebrated the fact that I didn't know, that I couldn't show up and make a scene or make everything about me. Which hospital? I asked, already standing up, already grabbing my purse. Maria told me, then added gently, "Are you sure you want to do this? After everything he's put you through, after the threats and the cruelty, do you really want to run to him? Comment below. Would you have gone to the hospital, or would you have stayed away to protect yourself?" "He's my son," I said simply. I don't know how to stop being his mother, even when he stopped being my son. The drive to the hospital felt endless. My mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. How serious was it? Was he in pain? Was he conscious? And underneath all those fears was a deeper, more shameful question. Would he even want me there? When I arrived at the hospital, I went straight to the information desk. The volunteer, an elderly woman with kind eyes, looked up my son's room number. 4th floor, room 412. But I should mention that the family has requested limited visitors. Of course they had. Sandra's doing, no doubt. "I'm his mother," I said firmly. "I'm going up." The elevator ride felt like it took years. When I reached the 4th floor, I walked down the sterile hallway, my footsteps echoing on the linoleum. Room 412. I stood outside the door for a moment, gathering my courage, then pushed it open. The scene inside made me gasp. My son was in the bed, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd seen him since he was a child. His leg was in a cast elevated by a complicated system of pulleys. Bandages covered parts of his arms. His face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut.